welcome back to Clearwater Music. I'm your host Sam from Samuel Plays Brass, and today we're looking at a really special instrument. This is a Yamaha YFH-631 Flugelhorn. Hey there everybody, welcome to the channel. To all the old hats in the audience, welcome back. We've got another instrument review today, so if you enjoy these, make sure to leave a like and a comment telling me so. And without further ado, let's get on with the Yamaha 631 Flugel. This is a horn that passed through the shop just recently for cleaning, and I've noticed some really interesting things about it in my research. It seems that the 631 is a little bit historic. It was only in production between 1972 and 1977. The serial number on this is just under the 7,000 range. You have your standard tunable lead pipe with screw. It's got the Yamaha logo right there. The lead pipe comes out as such, and that's how you tune the instrument. Flugelhorns are conical, and their tubing expands all the way through here in diameter, so it's tough to mount a cylindrical tuning slide on a conical instrument, which is why we have these types of lead pipes. The bell has this nice kind of rose-tinted color. I don't know the alloy composition of it, but I don't know, it looks nice. And it's complemented nicely by these red valve felts over here. The horn has two water keys, one on the main branch and one on the first valve slide. There's nothing on the third, as there are on some flugels, and I would prefer to have one generally, especially if there was a trigger mounted, because that would make it hard to take the slide off, but obviously in its current state, you just yank the slide out and dump it if you really need to. There's a lyre holder on this end of things, in case, like in the movie Brass Off, you are playing in a brass band and on the move, so you need to march around with your music in front of you. That's what that's for. It would once have had a third valve trigger. You could tell by that little nub there where a trigger is supposed to be mounted, and a little bit of leftover solder there. Unfortunately now there isn't a trigger, which makes intonation on some of those lower notes a little bit tricky, but in any case this flugel is a lot of fun to play. Flugelhorn bores can be a little bit of an anomaly. They're generally on the smaller side because we measure the bore of a brass instrument at the valve section, and flugels only have a very, very small amount of tubing leading up to it. We don't have a big, long lead pipe and tuning slide that wrap around like this, like on a trumpet. So when you hear that flugels have extremely small bores, it doesn't mean that they feel tight to play necessarily, but they can range hugely from like 0.413 inches to basically trumpet bore sizes of 0.459 and stuff like that if the flugel is built on a trumpet valve block. In my opinion, that's not the way to do things. It allows for less general expansion of tubing around here. This flugel is built on a 0.433 inch bore as far as I'm concerned, which is pretty standard as far as flugels go, so it feels right in the middle of the road. It's fairly open, and it allows for more tubing expansion to happen around this crook. One thing I'll mention about Yamaha instruments in general, and certainly this flugelhorn, is that their shank insertions can be a little bit different. This is a standard, like, large taper flugel receiver, but even so, mouthpieces will go a little bit further into it than normal. This is my Denis Wick 2FL in gold plate. It's got witness marks right about there on the shank, which means there's all this exposed space. On this instrument, the lead pipe practically swallows the mouthpiece. Now that's not a problem playability-wise, but if you don't generally play on a Yamaha and you borrow one, you're going to want to be careful not to insert the mouthpiece too forcefully into there or twist it around, because you may end up with some shank damage, where on other instruments it'll be visible when you put the mouthpiece in. On the topic of mouthpieces, since I've mentioned my Wick 2FL, I'll also address the mouthpiece that came with the horn. It is a Yamaha 12F3D. It's a little bit longer than the Wick and looks to have been built a little bit slimmer on the sides. The width on it is in between a Bach 7C, which is a Yamaha 11, and a Bach 3C, which is a Yamaha 14. The Wick is about Yamaha 17 or Bach 1.5, so it's definitely on the larger side. This is too small for me, but by all means, it's a middle-of-the-road mouthpiece for your typical high school player. The depth on it is vaguely flugelish and vaguely V-cupped. I'm not huge on the cup on this mouthpiece because this one is nice and deep and V-cupped in comparison. I apologize for being a little bit of a tonal purist on the Flugelhorn, but I have a very particular sound that I like, so I kind of tend to rag on these types of mouthpieces a little bit. In any case, depending on which excerpt I'm playing and which mouthpiece I'm using, you'll see that specified in the caption. Regardless of mouthpiece choice on this horn, it tends to sound pretty broad and rich, as you would expect from a Flugel. Yamaha's a very reputable company, no matter whether they're producing student, intermediate, or professional instruments, and generally they all have good tone quality. Their student models tend to have model numbers starting with 1 through 3. For instance, my 2335 trumpet, which I sold a few years back, that was a student model, and it sounded very dark for one. This is an upper intermediate. Those 4s through 6s, for instance, the 4335, those are targeted at upper high school and college level players, and by all means they do very well in that sphere. Their 7 through 9s tend to be professional tier instruments, such as my 8310Z trumpet or the 8310Z Flugel. That is a really, really state-of-the-art Flugel. I've played one once before, and it is, I'll admit, both darker and richer and even smokier than this horn. This is not a particularly smoky one. Now that I use that term, you don't hear a lot of breathiness and a lot of subtlety in the notes. It does well in the louder dynamics, especially with the Wick. It doesn't like to play too soft, and it just has kind of a dark, rich sound. If you use this Yamaha mouthpiece, it does do a little bit better in jazz, where you want a little bit more subtlety and a little bit more smokiness. So I suspect that's why it's been provided with this mouthpiece, is because it might do better in jazz settings that way. In any case, I prefer this for brass band and concert, but it does fine anywhere you put it. One thing I'd like to point out about my old 2335 trumpet was that it felt pretty stuffy in the upper register. This horn is quite the opposite. A lot of Flugels really cap out after high G. They don't want you to play high A's and B flats and all that. C's and D's pop out like nothing on this instrument. Sure, they pop out easily on the Yamaha, but even so on the Wick mouthpiece. That thing is a toilet bowl, and the high C's and D's still just pop out. You can just sit on them, they slot fine. As long as you use open for high D and not first valve, it won't be too flat. And honestly, I'm really, really impressed by the pitch and the free blowingness of the high register on this instrument. A lot of Flugelhorns want you to live in this golden register of low G to high G. I'd say the golden register of this instrument is actually low C to high C. You can play all those notes just fine. I get a little bit of fuzziness below low C, especially on these last couple notes where the pitch that's ingrained in my head really doesn't line up because I don't have this trigger, and I tend to psychologically mess myself up and fluff those notes. But in any case, it's a pretty free-blowing instrument, and I'm really impressed by how it responds. The pedal tones are obviously not an essential part of the range, but they're nice and fat and raucous if you ever want to add those into your jazz improv solos, and they are definitely a lot of fun. Verdict: the Yamaha 631 is a really, really nice instrument if you can get your hands on one. Preferably, do get one with a trigger because these fingerings do not feel good at the moment. But other than that, I really like putting this horn through its paces on different excerpts. It seems to work well in different styles. Like I said, I prefer it on the darker brass band stuff versus the smokier jazz ballad type stuff, but it does just fine anywhere. As I said, I'm not being limited by this horn. By all means, it's very strong in all areas of playing, so I'm not too dissatisfied with anything minus the absence of a trigger or pull ring. In any case, this has been the Yamaha 631. I really enjoyed making this review, and I hope you enjoyed watching it. If you want to see more instrument reviews, you can find them in a playlist linked up in the card in the top right corner of the screen. Thanks again for watching. This has been the Yamaha 631, and until next time, we'll see you on the flip side.